you already have a neurodiverse team, it is going to help your organization, your culture, your business, your leadership style to understand the different kinds of brains that are out there.
Welcome to Insights Unlocked, an original podcast from User Testing, where we bring you candid conversations and stories with the thinkers, doers, and builders behind some of the most successful digital products and experiences in the world, from concept to execution.
Welcome to the Insights Unlocked podcast. I'm Nathan Isaacs, Principal Content Marketing Manager at User Testing. And joining us today as host is User Testing's Lija Hogan, Principal for Experience Research Strategy. Welcome to the show, Lija.
Hi, everyone.
And our guest today is Tara May. Tara is the CEO of Aspiritech, an innovative tech company where over 90% of the staff are autistic adults. Tara is a nationally recognized advocate for neuro-inclusion in the workplace and a passionate leader helping organizations reimagine what talent, innovation, and kindness can look like at scale. Welcome to the show, Tara.
I'm glad to be here.
Great. So I am so excited to have this conversation because neurodiversity, I think, has been one of the most talked about areas of inclusion that I've been talking with our customers at User Testing about, actually. And so I'd love to get started with you just sharing a bit more about the story of Aspiritech and what it is really meant to build a workforce, value proposition, all those business related things, and think in an inclusive way around neurodiversity.
Well, first of all, Lija, I'm so glad to hear you say that it's being talked about because that means we're doing a good job, right? Because I think 18 years ago when we were founded, even 5 or 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. So Aspiritech was founded by two parents, Brenda and Moshe Weitzberg, who were helping their autistic son search for work and just not finding anything commensurate with his intelligence and capabilities. And so they actually modeled Aspiritech off of a company in Denmark that was teaching quality assurance and user testing to autistic adults. And they decided to bring it here to the US. From their kitchen table, fast forward to where we are today in 2025, we are a $6 million company with 100 employees, more than 90% of whom are autistic. And we do QA and user testing at scale for some Fortune 500 companies here in the US. And we're growing. We have a trajectory of reaching 10 million over the next 2 to 3 years. And we get to talk about neurodiversity in the workplace everywhere we go, which is, to me, one of the greatest things we can do to fulfill our mission.
Yeah, and that, I think, is a really great story and foundation to work from because a lot of organizations, whether or not they recognize it in a conscious way, include people who are neurodiverse in a variety of different ways, right? Not just autistic. Or, there are people who are out there with a number of different, I think, areas of need and also strengths. And so I'd love to continue the conversation around just thinking about just the fact that recognizing that neurodiversity is sometimes a superpower, actually, especially in the high-tech industry, where we have space to grow, I think, as a business community is in the area of kindness. And you've mentioned that kindness is really a business strategy. And how do you get people to grow in that way and embed that in how it is that you work and balance that as needed with, kind of a corporate setting, which sometimes isn't very kind?
So, Lija, I first want to underline and highlight a couple really important things that you just said. One is that, and I repeat this often, you already have a neurodiverse team at your workplace, right? Whether you know it or not, whether or not people talk about it, whether or not they are diagnosed or not. Because remember, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we weren't so great at diagnosis. In fact, one of the stories I hear most often is that as people's children are being diagnosed, all of a sudden those traits that the psychiatrist is talking about resonate with the parent, right? And so, yes, 1 in 20 people, or I'm sorry, 20%, 1 in 5 people have some form of neurodivergency, whether that's ADHD, OCD, autism, whatever, right? And even beyond that, we have 86 billion neurons firing in our brain that impact the way we experience the world. We all walk through this world differently. I don't know what it's like to walk through the world as Lija Hogan, and you don't know what it's like to walk through the world as Tara May, right? And so as you begin to understand this concept or think about it and be aware of it, I started to wonder why, with all the leadership and management books I've read over the years, and I am a leadership and management book junkie, I love them. Why did not a single one of them talk about our brains and the way we learn and socialize and communicate? Because it would seem to make sense that that would be a really important part of understanding your team as a manager and as a leader, right? And so that's one of the first things I talk about. You already have a neurodiverse team. It is going to help your organization, your culture, your business, your leadership style to understand the different kinds of brains that are out there. And then the second piece of that is being kind and empathetic to all kinds of humans in the workplace. And I put a phrase on this called the ROI of kindness, right? And the reason I do that is because I purposefully want to juxtapose a very hard-nosed business term with return on investment with sort of the softer idea of kindness, because a lot of people do not think of those as intrinsically interwoven, but they are. When you need to move at the pace of digital, at the pace of AI in 2025 and beyond, you need a workplace where people feel psychologically safe to fail, where they can innovate, where they can be embraced for their outside the box ideas. And the way you do that, right, is by being kind and empathetic and building relationships with your team members. My career has been steeped in digital transformation for decades now, longer than I like to say out loud. And one of the first things I say is that cultural change does not come from military style leadership. It comes from convincing your team that change is a good idea and giving them the space and the kindness to make those changes and to be part of it. If people are pushing back against it, it's not going to work. Transformation is not going to work.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And, I think that one of the biggest areas of opportunity that we have is really bringing that position of understanding, especially in the empathy profession where researchers and, people who really work on creating experiences, which is really about understanding people fundamentally, right? Like starting with that people first orientation does drive a ton of value.
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah. Well, shifting gears just a little bit, what are some of the misconceptions that you've had to really work through with some of your customers or team members that have helped you to really get people to understand and work better with you and hopefully with their customers too?
Yes, interesting. So 3 years in to leading an organization that's almost completely autistic, we work with a lot of clients who are excited about our mission, right? So they're coming into it with a very open mind. And so it's often less about misconceptions and more about this mystery, right? What is it going to be like to work with autistic team members? Now, if you have an autistic loved one, you almost immediately get it. You're like, okay, I get it, right? We're going to have an incredibly intelligent, focused, hardworking person. It's going to be great. But if you don't have autism in your life, which I certainly did not until my son was diagnosed, then you might just wonder, what is this going to be like? What do I need to know? And one of the first answers I give our clients when I talk to them is it's just like working with any other vendor, right? Autistic humans are humans. Therefore, you're going to see strengths and weaknesses. You're going to see different personalities. You're going to see the same myriad human experience as you do with anyone else. Now, there are some traits, right, that make sense and are in common with autistic people. We, for instance, try to introduce the concept of stimming, right? You'll often see neurotypical people tap their fingers, tap their toes, shake their legs, play with their hair, right? Those are all forms of stimming. And autistic people use that as a way to cope with feelings and sensory experiences. So it might be more prominent or more necessary for them to stim. So it's just little things like that, right? Those little pieces of education and awareness that can really go a long way, so that if you see someone playing with a fidget on a call, all of a sudden you're accepting about that rather than judging about that. Right? And those little things, they go a really, really long way. Another example, autistic people often need a different learning experience. Now, so for some of them, that may be auditory. They may need a chance to process out loud. For some of them, it may be written. They may really need that instruction in a bullet pointed fashion that they can follow and reference. So one of the things I always say is just ask, right? What do you need to be your best self at work? And wouldn't it be wonderful if we asked that question of everyone?
That's such a great point. I'm sitting here thinking about, there's so much that, I do a lot of education oriented activities, and just thinking about people are different types of learners. Some people are very physical in nature, right? Like they really need to move around. They're kinesthetic learners. And so wouldn't it be great if we just assumed that we needed to cover all those bases as we're creating educational opportunities for everyone? That's such a powerful point.
And I love that, Leah, that you bring up the educational setting, because I think we have gotten a lot better at providing those support systems K through 12. And then 18 comes, the workplace comes, college comes, and all of those support systems fall by the wayside. And I would love to see movement breaks happen as often at work as they do in the classroom setting.
Yeah, I will say this. Whenever I do that in the work setting, people laugh. It's like this relief. And so even just like introducing that, and it really is just a moment of joy, because it's something you don't get to do very frequently. So
absolutely. Yeah. And we all want it. We all crave it, right? We all don't want to sit in that meeting for 3 hours. We want to get up and move for a minute. We want a moment to ourselves to recalibrate. And, what I often say is that need is just even more critical for autistic people, but it's there for all of us. And so by thinking about neuroinclusion or neurodiversity, you're actually making your organization better for everybody.
Yeah, that's such a powerful point. And, kind of with that in mind, we often think about the check boxes around inclusion, and, and sometimes inclusion really means to a lot of organizations just checking those boxes. But one of the things that I think Aspiritech has done has been to roll out programming and training that's really around creating psychological safety. And what are some additional strategies that, people might take away from this conversation that they can do to get beyond those check boxes?
Yeah, it's such a great point, right? Because inclusion can't be about checkboxes when we all have different needs, right? You can't say, well, I'm going to keep the temperature set at 68 because that is the temperature that's most optimal for 50-year-old men, which is exactly why our offices are so cold, right? It just doesn't work to think about inclusion in one way when all of us are so different, right? So I think, there are absolutely things you can do that are really concrete and easy. One of them, is we have a sensory room in our office. It's a quiet space where you can get away from everyone and you can have some dimmer lighting. You can have quiet. You can spend some time alone. Well, I will tell you, everyone in our office uses that sensory space. It is not just used by autistic people, right? Everyone loves the escape. Another example is headphones, right? A lot of team members, and this is more exacerbated for autistic people, but I would say it's true of everyone, can't focus unless they can block out the noise around them, or whether by listening to music or just having noise cancellation, right? It's one of our most requested accommodations. But what I would say most of all, Leah, is that it's about creating the cultural space where it's okay to ask, right? It's okay to have a need. It's okay to be a human with a need. And therefore, it's safe to ask for whatever it is you might need, right? And I think that sort of cultural environment is more powerful than any list of checkboxes anyone could ever create.
I'm thinking back. I'm really thrilled that you said that, because there's it's okay to ask. And I was on a call yesterday around accommodating and supporting the needs of people who are hearing impaired. And one of the recommendations that was made in that session was ask. So I actually think there's a virtuous, cycle here where the company can actually set that tone by saying, what do you need? And also open that space for people to ask for what it is that they need too.
Yeah, I love that. And I work with a lot of HR people in our training and consulting capacity who are so excited to create a more inclusive, more engaging space. But they're also nervous because they're like, well, do I have to start asking people for a diagnosis, right? And there's areas of privacy. And the first thing I say is absolutely not. You do not need a diagnosis or someone's health information to simply say to them, what is it that you need? How can I be helpful? Let me open the door and say, if you have a need, I would like to help you fulfill it. We have a support team at Aspiritech, and the head of support has been here almost since the day Aspiritech's doors opened, so about 15 years. And one of the things she likes to say is that in 15 years, she has never gotten a request that she couldn't very easily and very affordably, if not for free, accommodate with just a little creativity, right? And so just what she's done is created an open door that people can walk through and ask for what they need. I'll give you a good example. One of our team members is really jarred if someone comes up behind him while he's working. It really bothers him, and it will create a situation where he can't work for the rest of the day. So Robin, our incredibly creative head of support, put his desk where there's a wall behind him. Problem solved, right? A little bit of creativity, didn't cost a dime, and now we have a very happy team member.
Yeah. It is the little things.
It is the little things. My son is autistic. He cares a lot about food. He's looking at me right now. And he will stress about what's for dinner. So we create a meal plan, right? He knows what's for dinner every night this week.
Yeah. It also makes it so much easier to shop too. Awesome. I have to say, I'm hearing your dog and I'm so amused because usually my cat comes to visit. So.
Well, and it's related to what we were just talking about because my son's Jimmy John's lunch just appeared and it made the dog mad. So here you are. Welcome to real life and my home, Leah.
I think we all have that these days.
We all have it.
Well, speaking of which, obviously a lot of what it is that we do right now, because we've got this world that's changing so quickly, is think about and actually create feedback loops so that we can understand the context where people are working and come up with solutions that address those needs. And so, thinking about that and just thinking about the fact that, more of us are working from home, maybe not all the time these days, but a greater proportion of the time. How can we as researchers do a better job of just making sure that we are creating experiences so that we can surface voices and needs in a way that is not just tactful and diplomatic, but empathetic? And then down the road, how do we translate what it is that we've learned so that we don't fall into some of those traps and assumptions that we're so used to?
So you're talking about one of my favorite topics. The answer I'm gonna give you, or the response, and I'm gonna say, Leah, that it's very clear from knowing you, even just 25 minutes. But also, I would say, I'm going to stereotype a little bit. I think all researchers are really good at this. It's listening, right? Listening is such a powerful tool as humans, in our family relationships, in the workplace, and as we try to improve the world. I would say the political system could use a lot more listening, for example, right? Listening to actually hear, right? Not to just respond, gives you such insight into what people are feeling and thinking and what they need, right? And listening at an organization can give you all sorts of innovation and tools and solutions if you take the time to listen at every level and think about how you can make things better. And the transition from that, right, that response to what do you actually do about it, is turning listening into action. So one of the things we do at Aspiritech when we roll out a change is we take it to the autism advocacy group, and we also have a town hall about it. That means we are doing a lot of listening, right? We're listening to that advocacy group that's acting as self-advocates. We're listening to everyone in the organization. Now, when it comes to feedback, you can't implement 100% of what you get, in part because it's going to be conflicting feedback, right? Some people are going to think it's a great idea. Some people are going to think it's the worst idea in the world. But you can absorb the feedback. You can use the feedback to improve your policies or your changes, and you can respond to it either by enacting change or by letting the team know why you can't, right? Why that might not work, right? Why we might not be able to do 10% raises this year, right? But all of that process, the process of listening, has allowed people to feel heard. And that's a really powerful thing. I mean, they say that's the driving force of why we even partner off and marry each other and fall in love. It's this person to share your life and to listen to your experiences with, right? And the more we can create that connection and that opportunity, the better our organizations are going to be and the better our lives are going to be.
Yeah. And, that's really fascinating, because what you just, in my mind, reconnected me with is just the idea that there's different types of empathy. I think what you just spoke about is the type of empathy that's really about compassion, really walking in the same shoes. And as researchers, we often think about a kind of more, I'll call it rational, but the type of empathy which is really understanding, and it's not sympathy, but really being able to design around and understand where it is that people are and what's motivating them and what their needs are, and then translating that into, in business speak, we would call it value, right? But, there's a very practical piece of the money type of value, which is the feeling type of value too, because a lot of design is emotional. A lot of what it is that we do as we provide products and services is accommodating, understanding those emotions and what's driving people to buy or not buy or do or not do.
All the technology in the world, all the AI advancements in the world, and we are just still humans living our life every day. And we feel all the feelings, right? And to pretend we don't is absurd, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of which, so AI, big topic of conversation these days, right? And, I think one of the areas of opportunity that we have is just understanding how do we make sure that AI takes into consideration or the experiences that we design with AI incorporated into them or driving them or powering them. How to make sure that those address the needs of people who are neurodiverse, and not just assuming that, kind of the old way of thinking comes up again in those experiences.
I'm so excited that you asked this question because I'm super passionate about this. And what I sort of harp on is that AI is a reflection of the knowledge base that humans have already built, right? And therefore, it is absolutely inherently biased, right? So one of the best things we can do to fight or combat that bias is to include neurodivergent people in the building of large language models and the underlying foundation of artificial intelligence. So that's one thing, right? One of the things Aspiritech is doing to contribute to that is taking our body of knowledge about building a neural inclusive workplace and creating a large language model off of that knowledge, right? So that's one. The second thing we can do is just be cognizant of it, right? So you can't be aware of the potential problems or the pitfalls if you're not talking about neurodiversity, right? Just by bringing it up, just by having me on this podcast, you are making sure that the conversation includes these elements. And it's interesting. I was at the Consumer Technology Association Foundation's meeting at in Vegas at CES. And one of the conversations we were having around accessibility was how challenging it can be to even create the standards that think about everyone. For example, AI and Alexa tools that make things better for visually impaired people can often make them more difficult for hearing impaired people, right? If you're thinking about all the voice activated things. When someone said that out loud at the CES show, I was sort of blown away. I was like, that's so true, right? And so how do you build the standards? Well, I think it's by including people with all sorts of abilities and having the conversation. Perfection is very hard to achieve. Progress is not, right? So let's just keep focusing on progress.
Yeah. And, I think what I really love about the principles that are in the WCAG standards and is just the fact that rather than saying it has to be this and it has to fit in this box, it's principles.
Yes.
And that enables so much when it comes to just being creative when you problem solve around that as a designer,
Totally.
as a
I think our
researcher.
testers have a love-hate relationship with the WCAG standards, right? For that reason, right? They're incredibly passionate. I think when you're an autistic person who's gone through the world that's not built for you, you want to help it be as accessible to as many people as possible. You don't want other people to have that experience. And I think that gives us a really special relationship with testing, but it also means that there are like literal arguments and conversations about how to use the standards to make it the best. And that debate, I think, is so healthy and wonderful because it's bringing awareness, it's bringing the conversation to the table, and it's saying, let's have a real meaningful conversation about how to make sure the world is as accessible to everyone as it can be. And certainly access to digital information in 2025 is access to the world.
Yeah. Oh, such like so many good points in what it is that you just said. I think, and I always think about it this way because, you know, those standards, I spend so much time with those standards with our customers at user testing, and people just say, well, are you compliant? And I'm like, that's the checkbox approach right there.
It's
and it just
progress towards access for all, right?
That I think is such an important thing.
It's a journey. It's a journey. And so I think it's the same with AI. Let's just make sure neurodiversity is part of the journey.
Yeah. Well, you know, speaking of which, we spoke earlier about just the fact that bringing neurodiversity into the calculus around how we improve the experiences makes experiences for everyone. So, why? I know that's kind of like a high level question.
No, I love that question.
Why?
It's because neurodiversity refers to all of us, right?
Yeah.
So when you think about the umbrella of neurodiversity, you have about 20% of people, like we said earlier, that fall into neurodivergent, meaning their brains are so outside the box that we put a name on it. We give it a diagnosis. We give it a label. The other 80% of us that might be referred to as neurotypical, we're still all individuals, right? We still all have these powerful, unique, incredible brains. I mean, I mentioned 86 billion neurons firing. Well, the most advanced AI only has about 2 billion pathways firing, right? We're still so much more complicated than that, right? And I often say identity too is so complex. We are not just one thing. We are not just the color of our skin. We are not just our nationality. We are not just our socioeconomic status or educational status. We are a million layers of identity and complexity deep. And so if we just pause for a moment to embrace that rather than fight so hard against it, that makes organizations and the world better for all of us.
Yeah, it's really true. And I think in a strategic way, that's true. And in a very tactical way, that's true too, because I think one of the other things that just came to mind for me is, so 80% of us are neurotypical most of the time, but under certain conditions, we may not be.
Yes, 100%. So neurodiversity and disability in general are one of the few marginalized groups where you could be born not in that group, and over time you could end up falling in that group. For example, I met a woman who was born a fully able-bodied human, was in a terrible accident, and now is a quadriplegic from the neck down, right? Paralyzed. And she is a huge disability advocate now. And she wouldn't have ever imagined that for herself 30 years ago or 40 years ago, right? And it can be the same with neurodiversity. So a few things, right? PTSD, trauma completely changes your brain. And if you have PTSD, all of a sudden you're a neurodivergent person, right? I'll give you another example that about half of the world that can relate to. Menopause completely changes your brain. I mean, I hit menopause and I dealt with depression and anxiety in a way I had not for 99% of my life, right? And depression and anxiety changes your brain and makes you have to deal with neurodivergencies, right? So yes, absolutely. Moments of emergency, right? Turn us all into neurodivergent people, because that panic that ensues all of a sudden changes the way your brain is working at that moment, right? We are doing a pretty massive project with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and they want to make sure all of their content and information is accessible to everyone, because in the moments of catastrophic weather events, you do not want to leave people behind in terms of accessing information. A few examples, but we could go on and on about them, right?
Yeah. And those are great examples. Those are all, I think, very accessible examples that most of us have observed in our lives. So, right. Yeah.
I won't even mention teenage brains, which we could talk about another day.
Teenagers are definitely a class into themselves.
Indeed.
That's awesome. So, one last question before we start to wrap up for today. And it's really around how do people get started in their journey? So not every company has really started integrating some of these best practices into what it is that they do. It can sometimes feel like a huge lift to get started. What would you recommend as people start down this road?
You know what? I would recommend first the simplest thing of all, a quick Google search or Chat GPT question, if that's your preference nowadays. Just look it up. Look up neurodiversity, look up autism in the workplace, and see what you're missing out on, right? Because you're missing out on some really fantastic, loyal, highly retained, highly engaged employees. And I promise you, if you do a little bit of Googling and a little bit of research, you're going to want to learn more, and you're going to want to find out what that could look like for your organization, right? Aspiritech is certainly willing to help you on that journey. Visit our website, check out what we do. We are such advocates for helping organizations also be neuro-inclusive, because we know it's good for neurodivergent people and it's good for the world.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I just thank you so much for sharing that recommendation, because I think just to let people know, when you do this, because you will hopefully go away and do this, you'll learn that some of these tweaks, because they really are tweaks, are not that hard, right? It's not about like saying we have to, this whole new big policy that you have to follow now. It's just you in your own role evolving how it is that you work.
Many of them are simple and free, and they will make your workplace better for everyone.
Yeah. So with that, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such an inspiring conversation. And you mentioned a couple of ways to kind of learn more about Aspiritech. Did you want to share any additional ways to learn more about Aspiritech as a company, some of your thought leadership, or some of the topical things that you think might be helpful for people to just know?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website's a great place to start, www.aspiritech.org, because we are a nonprofit. Follow me on LinkedIn. My name's the easiest name in the world, Tara May, and you will learn so much and be part of an international conversation on neurodiversity and autistic employment that you'll love. I promise you. And thank you, Lija, for having me. It was just an absolute joy of a conversation.
Well, thank you. That's awesome. And again, thank you so much. And we'll see everyone next time.
Bye-bye.